The most sickening part of the response to Yvette Cooper's address, though, was from independent MP, Muslim MP, Shokat Adam, and he said that actually, much like the old Norm Macdonald joke, the worst part about the systematic gang rape of, as Sarah Champion estimated, possibly 1 million or more white working class children in Britain, isn't the rape, it's the backlash to innocent Muslims.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Perpetrators of sexual crimes must face the full force of the law regardless of their race, their religion or their nationality. But an overseas bad faith actor is using truly horrific cases of group-based child rape to demonise a community and slander a minister of the Crown, someone who has genuine experiences in helping the victims of abuse. This narrative is false and this narrative is dangerous. Many reports from 2015 to 2024 have concluded that the common denominator for sexual violence is not immigration, race or culture. Isn't this the real point here? If the victims are being falsely told perpetrators look a certain way or are part of a certain community, they will have a false sense of security when with people who don't fit that stereotype. The real issue here is we need discussion to be focused around victims and not political rhetoric, and we need evidence-based policies.
I mean, you might have noticed he's got a bump on his head there. I think that's from excess praying. There's an actual thing that happens. Look it up. So, Muslim independent MP Shokat Adam says that there's absolutely no identifying characteristic of these group-based child sexual exploitation perpetrators. Therefore, the true horror is that the victims themselves might think, oh, I'm more likely to be gang raped as a child by this man than this one, so I'm going to avoid this man and not this one. And suddenly they will be subjected to abuse by the demographic that is least likely to perpetrate it by avoiding the demographic that is most likely. This is a deliberate obfuscation of what is actually happening here, which is sickening. And it's because, of course, he was elected on a sectarian basis by the ethnic and religious preferences of Muslim voters who, belonging to an ummah, wanted independent Muslim MPs elected on the platform of we care more about Gaza than we do about Great Britain. So let's take his claim at face value. Was Islam to blame for the grooming gangs? This is the position that it's not of Tim Stanley in The Telegraph. Now, I know Tim, nice chap, good Catholic, absolutely wrong on this, because he writes, as the centre-right embraces the language of civilizational conflict and deportations, catalysed by the grooming gang scandal, I find myself defending a small island of cosmopolitan conservatism. I might loathe Shamima Begum, ISIS bride, for example, but the notion that because her parents are Bangladeshi we can revoke her citizenship is deeply troubling. Blood and soil stuff, not very British. So, I read that out because Tim's obfuscation of the matter here is motivated by a personal, emotional commitment to liberalism, not the facts of the matter. And then he provides this non sequitur, right? If we are saying Islam is behind this, we also have the problem of France. There are 51 men who have been found guilty of raping an unconscious housewife, all ages and backgrounds. Unable to pin it on Muhammad, the defence latched on to their clients' high sex drives and addictions to porn as if they were victims of the opposite cultural context to that found in rural Pakistan. Now that's disgraceful. Of course, all those men should be hung for their participation in it. But one example of a gang rape in a foreign country does not therefore mean that the perpetrators of this specific type of gang rape were not motivated by ethnic and religious hatred of the other. We'll get onto some examples as to how. He says, Britain is a country so divided, so lacking a healthy middle ground of cultural exchange, that we can live within inches of each other yet remain as strangers. Let's not open that gulf further by ostracising good Muslims. So it's fearing social division and trying to play the neutral arbiter between two hostile factions, one which is aggressed against the other, by the way, because you're not getting roving bands of white men raping Muslim or Pakistani girls. Tim is trying to play the sensible middle ground between the two. It's all very well for Tim Stanley to say, this isn't real Islam. What do the Muslims themselves say? Imams promote grooming gangs according to, and this is a chap called Dr. Taj Hargi. You might be thinking, what authority does he have? He's the Imam of the Oxford Islamic Congregation and the head of the Oxford Institute for British Islam. So you might think that he might know something about the matter. So he says, and this was back in 2013, when the Oxford grooming gang trial that kicked off this entire international conversation that caught Musk's attention was being prosecuted and publicised. He says, and quote, "The activities of the Oxford sex ring are bound up with religion and race because all the men, though of different nationalities, were Muslim and they deliberately targeted vulnerable white girls whom they appeared to regard as easy meat, to use one of their revealing racist phrases." That's a phrase that was cited by then former Home Secretary Jack Straw about how the Muslim Pakistani men saw these vulnerable white girls. He's saying that this is embedded in the ideology that's preached by imams in their mosques. He says, "The men are taught that women are second-class citizens, little more than chattel or possessions, over whom they have absolute authority. The view of some Islamic preachers towards white women can be appalling. They encourage their followers to believe that these women are habitually promiscuous, decadent and sleazy, sins which are made all the worse by the fact that they are kuffars, or non-believers. Their dress code, from miniskirts to sleeveless tops, is deemed to reflect their impure and immoral outlook. According to this mentality, these white women deserve to be punished for their behaviour by being exploited and degraded. To pretend that it's not a problem in the Islamic community is ideological denial. But then part of the reason this scandal happened at all is precisely because of such politically correct thinking. All the agencies of the state, including the police, the social services and the care system, seemed eager to ignore the sickening exploitation that was happening before their eyes. Terrified of accusations of racism, desperate not to undermine the official creed of cultural diversity, they took no action against obvious abuse." This is an imam saying this. So he's saying that the imams in the mosques of the perpetrators of the rape gangs were telling them that white women deserve to be denigrated, tortured and abused because they are non-believers, because their liberal sexual morality, even as children, allows them to be punished, and because they are not extended equal moral consideration as those of the ethnic kin or Islamic clan, it's fair game. This is an imam saying this. So Tim Stanley, compared to this imam, is not an authority on Islam. And so he was interviewed by Martin Daubney last week on GB News, and he says some very interesting things, and he upheld his comments that he made 11 years ago in light of the renewed attention to the scandal. Hagi said, "There's a perpetuation of them and us. The theology from the mosque and the elders is to perpetuate this idea of them and us. The criminality is fueled by the ideology of Islamic fundamentalism, which has no basis in the Quran," and we might quibble with him on that. "These fundamentalists believe that if the Prophet Muhammad can sleep with a 9-year-old, what's wrong with me sleeping with a 12-year-old, even though that story is not true." Brackets. It is. Unfortunate fact for this man who seems very nice. The idea is when you can delegitimize these youngsters as being less than human and being less than equal, and for you to do whatever you please, that is the basis for these men to act like that. There is this ideology, this interpretation of Islam, which makes this possible. Why is virtually every single person in these grooming gangs Muslim? It seems like 95% of them are. We need to look at the interconnection between Islam, promoted by the clergy, and the establishment in the UK, because Islam is not promoting this reprehensible behaviour. And it is fair to say that the vast majority of British Muslims do not do this. But it is also fair to say that these psychopathic child abusers are deriving justification for their crimes from the specific branch of Islam, Wahhabism, Deobandism, and from their ethnic in-group hatred. They are deriving justification for their motivation from Quranic scripture and lectures in the mosque. And again, Imam is saying this, so he's more of an authority on this than Tim Stanley is. And when the imams tried to preach against this, and this is in 2013, following the Oxford grooming gang trial, the rape gang trial, Together Against Grooming, a group of imams who, for their credit, tried to speak out against this, 2 Muslims, were blocked from giving their anti-grooming sermons. So this is Sheikh Ibrahim Mogra, and he says, and he was at Abu Bakr Mosque in Leicester, he says, "People were troubled by us reading the sermon, and one man asked me how he could stop it being read. As I said to him, our only option is to speak out about it." So, to his credit, he was trying to, but people were trying to censor this because they knew it was going on in the community. And then the idea that this had no connection to Islam, well, 2017 in Rochdale, or Rotherham, rather, they yelled Allahu Akbar as they left the court. Need I say more? There's an obvious connection here to Islam as the justification for what these predators wanted to do, because the girls are white working class but also kuffar, non-believers. So this is a motivating factor, it's a compounding factor for this. Ethnicity is also a factor. So we've got data now, and this is very slim data, mind you, but figures from all 43 forces police forces in England and Wales show 13.7% of child sexual exploitation grooming offences in the first 9 months of the last year involved Pakistanis. In 2023, they accounted for 6.9% of the grooming crimes reported to police. This is between 2 and 4 times higher than their representation of the population, when Pakistanis officially, as of the 2021 census, account for 2.7%. Now, important things to point out. The Boris wave of mass third world migration didn't start until after the census had been taken, so that's going to be a large percentage now. This is why Rakib Hassan, himself a Muslim, has said we need an emergency 2026 census to know exactly how many people from where are in the country. But also Charlie Peters points this out. Police chiefs have stressed that, as was already mentioned because of the Alexis J report, ethnicity recording is not mandatory for these types of crimes. They have very limited data to go on. And so it's more than likely that because the majority of these crimes haven't been prosecuted or ever brought to light, and because the ethnicity of the perpetrators isn't mandatorily reported, this is a massive undercounting. So they're 4 times per capita overrepresented in child sex offences to their portion of the population. But even then, that's still a massive underestimate of what the actual disproportionate number is. So Britain has a real problem with Muslim Pakistani men gang raping white working class children. And it's reflected in the statistics, it's reflected in their own statements, it's reflected in the fact that when dissidents within the community who think, well, child rape's a problem, try to speak out, they get silenced. And it's also reflected in their culture. So Kemi Badenoch was interviewed by Charlie Peters the other night, and she said that it's people from peasant backgrounds doing this. That's very vague. She didn't say Pakistani, she didn't say Muslim. She was basically doing everything she could to avoid saying majority Maripur. So Maripur is a region of Pakistan where lots of these people of this heritage come from. It's a very localized thing. I think that's probably to do with the clannish practices of cousin marriage. And that's a very poor agrarian area of Pakistan that have moved over to Britain. We're only getting the best and brightest here, folks. Jenrick's much stronger, as per usual, and he said that we have lots of men here, millions of people, who've entered the UK in recent years, and some of them have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes towards women. He's also said that we need mandatory whole life sentences for British nationals to do this, and the instant deportation of foreign nationals involved in these crimes. The Liberal Democrats took offence to this for some reason, him saying that if you gang rape a child, you've got medieval values. The Liberal Democrats said, that's not right, you've upset the gang rapists, and therefore Robert Jenrick needs to be sacked. They said it's divisive comments. What, divisive against child rapists? Kemi Badenoch actually stood by him, credit to her, and said, and the spokesperson for the Conservative Party said, Robert Jenrick did an excellent job this morning explaining the pressing need for a national inquiry into the rape gang scandal. The Liberal Democrats should spend less time worrying about tweets and instead explain to the British people why they oppose an inquiry that would end the culture of cover-ups in our institutions and finally get justice for the victims. Very good. After this, Guy Dampier, who was the collaborator on Charlie Peters' documentary Grooming Gangs Britain's Shame, which you should watch on GB News, wrote an article in The Telegraph saying the ultimate immigration taboo has just been broken because this is a fuse that has been lit to ignite the broader conversation about said medieval values, and frankly, medieval Britain didn't even do this level of barbarous torturism, that have been imported into this country. Here's some quotes from the perpetrators that can, again, give you an insight into the racial and religious hatred that motivated these crimes against these girls. Take this quote from Badrul Hussain, a member of the Newcastle rape gang. When caught travelling on public transport without a ticket, he told the female ticket inspector all white women are only good for one thing, for men like me to use like trash. That's all women like you are worth. Other testimony from victims details how frequently they referred to as white slags, white whores, or white C-words, as Sam Ashworth-Haynes reporting has revealed. Yasmin Ali Harvey Brown revealed how the wives of rape gang members sometimes blamed the victims as well, with one describing white girls as filthy because of the way they dressed. And we'll get back to a case of that from one of the murdered girls that I mentioned earlier. The problem is, the Labour government would rather criminalise talking about this fact than actually do anything about it. Because multiple councils now, including councils where the rape gangs have happened, have adopted the Labour Party's definition of Islamophobia. And I say the Labour Party's because it was the all-party parliamentary group on Islamophobia, but it was led at the time by Wes Streeting, who is now the Health Secretary, and who is eyeing up Keir Starmer's shoulder blades to plunge a knife into it to take over himself. And last time I mentioned how Camden Council had adopted this definition, which sought to criminalise Muslims being characterised as sex groomers as racist and Islamophobic. Well, this is news from GB News. Oxford, Newcastle, Manchester and Calderdale, 4 areas where the local council have adopted this definition of Islamophobia, are also areas where the rape gangs have taken place. So they're seeking to criminalise, as Islamophobic, discussion of the rape gangs being comprised predominantly of Pakistani heritage Muslim men, when it's a fact, while it's happening in their own area. The report cautioned against the phrase Asian grooming gangs. Well, it's not Sikhs and the Japanese that are doing this, so I think that is probably a bit racist, actually. It's Pakistani Muslim rape gangs, and said it was a modern repetition of, quote, age-old stereotypes and tropes about Islam, of sexual profligacy and paedophilia, or Islam and violence, claiming they heighten the vulnerability of Muslims to hate crimes. Now, this piece in The Spectator actually details that the GMB Union in 2022, which had 600,000 members, was the first trade union to adopt the definition, and it's now been adopted, according to a Freedom of Information request by Hardeep Singh for Civitas in 2023. It's been adopted by 52 councils in England, so 1 in 6 have this on the statute books. Now, Wes Streeting has decided, at the midst of this scandal reaching global significance, to dive on this grenade. He's tweeted out, two things are true at the same time. Political correctness failed victims of Pakistani rape gangs, and people of Pakistani heritage in our country are equally sickened by these crimes and fear being tarred with the same brush, because he did an interview with Pippa Creer in The Guardian. Now, I'd like to point out, because my tweet is just below this, I wrote this article, The Victims of Diversity for Courage Media. I recommend you read it. As I note in here, actually the families of the rape gangs, the Pakistani communities, very tight-knit ethnic enclaves in Britain, aren't appalled by this, because the family members of the men convicted in 2024 in Rotherham, which Charlie Peters was the only journalist to attend the trial of, the family members cried out of Mohammed Siab, "I love you, Dad," as he was let out of the dock. And other family members tried to start fights with the victims who gave their statement and had to be held back by court security. So they were attacking the victims and shouting support for the perpetrators even after their fathers has been sentenced for their reprehensible crimes like raping children in school playgrounds. And the culture of cover-up has been documented by Pakistani Muslims as well. The Muslim Women's Network had complained that far too little attention was paid to Muslim girls also being abused by members of the Pakistani gangs in a different way, because it's familial abuse rather than targeting vulnerable white working class girls in care and the like for ethnic and religious reasons. But the entire community kept the abuse of their own girls under wraps because they didn't want to bring collective shame upon the clan, the family, or the ethnicity and religion in the wider culture. Mohammed Shafiq, whose 3 cousins were jailed as part of the Rotherham grooming gang trials in 2013, explained that, quote, the crimes of the Hussein brothers represent a stain on the Pakistani community that can never be truly rubbed away, and that for this reason, some British Pakistanis have deliberately buried their head in the sand and see any of us who try to tackle this problem as siding with the white enemy. And when he spoke out in 2016, he said, the sad reality is that in the case of on-street gang grooming, there is an overrepresentation of Pakistani men. Until British Pakistanis accept this is a problem for our community, we will not be able to eradicate this evil by burying our head in the sand, as the usual response is just not good enough. So he knows, as the communities themselves have demonstrated, that there is a collective cover-up within this community because they have more allegiances to the Ummah, the international Muslim community, their families, and their ethnic in-group, than they do to see justice done, impartial of race and religion, even when their husbands, brothers, fathers, cousins, and friends have raped children. So no, Wes, they don't really care. And despite knowing this, clearly, because all of this is publicly available information, Wes Streeting has said to The Guardian in an interview that if you talk about this issue, you're going to cause another Christchurch shooting. He says, right, if Kemi Badenoch is in any doubt whatsoever about where irresponsible and coarse public discourse can lead on this issue, look to the other side of the world in Christchurch, New Zealand, where someone walked into a mosque and killed innocent Muslims stone dead with a gun whose magazine had inscribed on it, "For Rotherham." Again, if you would have dealt this problem, you wouldn't be radicalising people in such a fashion. But stop trying to use emotional blackmail to get people to stop talking about a problem which your own party have caused and covered up, Wes. We have to be extremely clear, he says, about the failings, the nature of it, and not allow political correctness, fear of stating the truth as it is to fail victims as happened before. We must also make sure that entire communities are not tarred with the same brush. Basically, translation, if you talk about this, you're Hitler. Do you know who thinks that? Wes Streeting. Because he cooked up the definition of Islamophobia in 2019, and here he is in The Guardian saying, yes, Islamophobia is a type of racism, here's why. The report that he references in this article is here. Islamophobia defined from the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims. It was co-chaired by Anna Soubry and Wes Streeting. But as they detail in here, the group undertook 4 community consultations in 4 cities in the UK, Manchester, London, Birmingham and Sheffield. And they did so through what they call equality organisations, so beneficiaries under the Charities Act of furthering goals of equality and diversity. Basically, the Charities Act bakes into law the fact that the government must fund left-wing activist groups. The groups that they asked were the Runnymede Trust, who in 1997 introduced the term Islamophobia to British public parlance, the same year that Blair took power, after the Muslim Brotherhood had invented it to silence critics akin to anti-Semitism or homophobia. So it's the Runnymede Trust and Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate are responsible for this definition. The lying communist attack dog group, which have routinely attacked anyone that has tried to speak out about the grooming gangs, they invented this Islamophobia definition, which says, and I'm going to quote, "One real-life example of this concerns the issue of grooming gangs. Clearly, it is aimed at and can achieve harm to individual Muslims and is not rooted in any meaningful theological debate, but rather in a racist attempt at other Muslims in general." So, according to Wes Streeting, Hope Not Hate, the Runnymede Trust, various MPs, and the Labour Party who adopted this officially in 2019, the current Labour government, according to the current Labour government, if you say that Islam and a hatred of white people inspired the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs in this country, which is still going on, you're a racist, and you should be prosecuted for that. Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.